So hi, my name's Greg Kolwicz. I work with CASA of Missoula. So some of you guys might have some familiarity with our program. Some of you guys might have a CASA yourselves, and some of you might not have any idea what CASA means. So Brian and I are here just to discuss, what CASA is, the role that we play in the community, and ways in which that we can help support you guys as foster care parents. So before I delve into things too much, I just wanted to say thanks for coming tonight, and thanks for the role that you guys play in the community. I see every single day. Brian and I were just talking about before we ate dinner how sacrificial being a foster care parent is, and that's something that I see happen in my line of work every single day. So I am super appreciative of what you do, and super appreciative of the fact that you're here tonight to learn about CASA. So, as I said, some of you might have some familiarity with us, but for those of you who don't, I'll just give a brief rundown of what we do. So CASA stands for Court Appointed Special Advocate. We are a volunteer-run organization, and essentially our volunteers act as the eyes and the ears of the judge to help represent the best interests of the child in the courtroom. So we have about 120 volunteers right now, all who have gone through at least 30 hours of training. We bring in trainers from CFS, the court systems, we bring in therapists, and our volunteers are then appointed by the judge and assigned to an abuse and neglect case, and then they help advocate for the child or children associated with that abuse and neglect case. The end goal of that interaction is for the CASA to write a written report, which are submitted quarterly. And we have a really strong relationship with the court systems. The judges really appreciate those reports written by our CASAs, because they're really in all the legal documents that get strewn about in these court proceedings. A CASA's report is the only substantial document of information that a judge has when he makes his rulings. So the work that we do and the work that our volunteers do is super valuable. CASA was formed back in the 70s out of Seattle. It's a nationwide organization, but a nonprofit here locally. And it was just formed out of the idea that, as you guys know, the system is overworked. Annually, 600,000 kids go through the foster care system. They're spending up to 2 years of their lives, oftentimes more, in the foster care system. And on average, all of them or many of them are changing homes 2, 3, 4 plus times. So the role of a CASA can really help to mitigate those numbers, and that's sort of what we're about here at CASA. Here in Missoula, we're seeing a pretty staggering rise in the amount of abuse and neglect cases. Personally, I feel it's largely due to how pervasive meth has unfortunately become. Over the past year, in 2015, we had 165 new abuse and neglect cases open. As I said, we have 120 active volunteers. So we have a handful, more than a handful, of cases that don't have a CASA. On top of that, because meth is such an underlying issue, what we're also seeing is a rise in the amount of cases that are reopening. So cases that CFS has previously stepped out of and the case was dismissed, we're seeing those be reopened because, you know, parents previously got their lives together, and then once things were all hunky-dory again, meth crept its way back in, and CFS had to get re-involved. So that's sort of CASA in a nutshell. We are a super small little office. We're located just right downtown near the courthouse. We have 2 full-time staff people, myself and a woman by the name of Charity, who's actually on maternity leave right now. So we effectively have 1 full-time staff person. I do have 2 counterparts who work about 15 to 20 hours. And our role is we each supervise a different court. So we each have about 30 to 40 volunteers that we supervise. But really all the groundwork, all the frontline work is done by people like Brian here. Our volunteers are really the lifeblood of the organization, and you know, what I do is pretty minute compared to what a person like Brian is able to accomplish in the courtroom. The order that a CASA gets, I think Brian's going to share it with you. It's a pretty powerful tool. We have access to information that not even all the attorneys do, not the social workers. So the ability that a CASA has to impart change and to positively affect these kids is, as I said, really, really powerful. So before we get into more of the specifics about how we can support you guys, do you have any specific questions about what CASA is or what we do?
I have a question about it.
Yeah.
So since you have such little bit of, people and such a big whole bunch of kids that need it, do you go on the worst cases to take, or is how that works?
Good question.
Yeah, that is a good question. So once a month, our staff meets with CFS, and we effectively prioritize cases. So me as a staff person, I go to every single abuse and neglect hearing that happens, as do the other staff people. And so in conjunction with the CFS supervisors, those who supervise the social workers, we meet to prioritize cases. That being said, we have the discretion to assign a CASA to whoever we feel needs it. So if you as a foster parent, feel that your case or your child could benefit from a CASA, you come to us and say, hey, we could really use you, and we'll try our best to make that happen. Yeah.
So we have 2 CASA workers with multiple kids in our home. One of them is in our home every week, and we absolutely love her. Absolutely love her. How many different family groups can the CASA be responsible for?
Most only feel comfortable taking on one family. I think Brian has multiple cases, however. We don't have any current volunteers that have more than 3 cases they're working on. But typically it's just one, and that's, especially if the case is particularly active, that's preferred, and that's sort of the idea behind the role, is that you're getting individualized representation for your child. Yeah.
You mentioned that the process has information that the social workers might not have. What would that be?
Our order, maybe you can speak to this a little bit.
Well, yeah. The CASA essentially has the authority of the judge. So I'll read this order, or read parts of this order in a minute, but essentially we can go anywhere, see any record, talk to any person that has anything to do with the child, children, or the parents. That's more authority than the police have. That's more authority than the social worker has. So it's a really meaningful role. But you can, for instance, you could get information on the psychological evaluation of a parent, say, that might not be, the social worker may not be able to get to. They may not be able to get to it as easily. All I got to do is go in and show them this order. And if you don't like it, call the judge. So it's really remarkable. That's one of the reasons I'm shamelessly enthusiastic about CASA. I just love it. There's a lot of reasons I love it. I don't like wasting my time. And with this kind of authority and the ability you have to get things done and go talk to people, you're not going to waste your time. I love the idea of average citizens being involved in this very important process in our judicial system, having people that are presumably have a little common sense and some training, looking over the shoulder of the system and inputting some common sense and hopefully some compassion to the judge to help him make a better decision. So, yeah.
Do the classes have any mental health training? Because I took some NAMI courses, and my parents both have mental health issues. And what I learned that NAMI training, even though I had been around mental health issues for about 10 years, was like amazing. And sometimes I feel like if the classes don't have mental health issues, they really don't. How could they possibly get it?
Some of us have mental health issues, but I don't know if we have training. We have, we don't have the kind of level of training you're talking about. But I will tell you, the training. There's another thing I love about training is excellent. It's on point. It's personable. It's interactive. I felt like the training, the initial 30 hours, very well prepared me for doing the work, and the ongoing training that these guys put on is really good. So you can pick up a lot of that, and there are lots of options for other places you can, if you're interested in, say, sexual abuse or in fire setting or in mental health, you can go after and get continuing training in those areas. So you asked about how many cases you can take, and Greg, I would just add to what Greg said is that cases tend to sort of go through a cycle. They start off and they tend to be pretty intense. You're gathering a lot of information, you're researching, you're talking to people, interviewing people, looking at records, and then as time goes on, they tend to sort of stabilize and become a little more predictable. And as he said, I've had 3 cases, I've got 2 active right now, but my first case is tailing off. It's going really well, the kids are in great places, and so the last case that I took, I felt like I was ready to kind of take another one. So it just depends on the cases, yeah, and the person, I suppose. So.
Well, we like our CASA work so much, and we have 2 new placements coming in that we've had in the past, and they didn't have CASA workers in.
Yeah.
So I asked her, I said, so how do we get you court appointed to these 2 now?
We hear that a lot, yeah. Yeah, I guess you didn't say that. I think you've got 300 active cases.
Yeah.
And a case is a child, so in some cases, I might take a case that has 3 kids. Well, that's 3 cases. So of the 300 active cases, 300 active children involved, there's fewer number of situations that we would take. So, but still, we're way short on number of advocates. And you train 30 or 40 a year, and the number
at least, yeah.
Yeah, the number really never goes up. So there's a lot of turnover.
Yeah, our problem right now is retaining. We asked for a year commitment. Personally, I'd like to see that bumped up a year, because these cases, as you know, extend well beyond a year. So yeah, we just already this year we just sworn in 13, and we're about to swear in another 25, but unfortunately I imagine at this time next year we'll probably still have the same amount of CASAs, just because people move, they get worn out on the work, so there's a variety of reasons, but point being is we're always looking for people who are willing to volunteer and people who are willing to see a case through its duration.
Yeah, I think they ought to say, if you're going to volunteer, first, we're volunteers, so you can't make us do anything. But I think if you're going to, people tend to respect a commitment that they've made if they're able to, and they don't have something that unusual that comes up. I think you ought to say, look, if you take a case, see it through, because it's important to these kids to have one CASA, and I think it's important that if you're going to make a commitment to be a CASA, see a case through. And I'll talk about the duration of cases in a minute, and maybe a little bit about what CASAs do, but I really want to leave time, especially for questions about how you as foster adoptive parents can use your CASA and get a CASA maybe even if you don't have one, and the things that we can do for you and the things we can't do for you. So if there's no other questions, I've got a few other things I wanted to add, elaborate on what Greg said. And the original, you may know this having been in the process, when you go to court sometimes there's tons of people there, and you got the kids, usually more than one. You got kids have an attorney if they're old enough. There's parents, and they're often not together, and they've each got an attorney. Sometimes there's more than one dad. Often there's more than one dad, and they've got an attorney. Sometimes there's grandparents that have an attorney. The state's got an attorney. The state's got a caseworker. And all these people have different dogs in the fight, really. And the idea behind a CASA was the guy that started it in Seattle back in '77 said, I want someone who's got only one dog in the fight to give me an unbiased opinion about what's best for the kid. And you might think that would be something that was already in the system, but it's not, because the attorneys, interestingly enough, and I didn't know this till I went through training, attorneys' job is not to represent the best interest of someone, but their wishes. A little different when you got a little kid, but when an attorney represents a 10-year-old kid, if that kid says, I want to go back to be with my mommy, well, that attorney is supposed to advocate for that. Whereas a CASA, you might say, well, mommy's in jail and she's been doing meth for 6 months and she's not changing her life, and that's not good for that kid. So the judge wants somebody to say, who's got some modicum of common sense and has researched and investigated the facts of the case, and gives him a recommendation that's based on what's best interest of the kid. And in training, they tell us that basically comprises three things: a safe home, a permanent home, as quickly as possible. And I'll talk about those. Safe home and permanent home, as you can imagine, may require some judgment, because for me, who grew up in a white picket fence house and had no exposure to the social welfare world or the criminal justice world for that matter, it is an adjustment to get used to seeing some of the families where your foster kids have come from. And I know you see that, and you look at those families and say, wow, that is just horrible parenting. That is not a safe place for a kid. And the reality is, the studies all show that almost without exception, kids are better off with their biological parents than not. Now, the almost includes things like abuse and neglect and drugs and violence and all those things. But we learn about something in training called good enough parenting. Yeah, it's kind of like fingers on a chalkboard to me. Good enough parenting, it's like just good enough. And I think the point is that as a society, taking kids away from parents is a big deal. And it ought to be a big deal. Think about that. So as a society, we have a pretty high bar to remove and make judgments about whether your parenting is good enough or her parenting is good enough, and so forth. And so it's not our job to make sure these kids are raised like I was raised or like you were raised. That's hard sometimes. So there's that judgment of a safe home and a permanent home. And that's probably, I would say, the hardest thing to make a recommendation on as a CASA is that family going to be safe? Is that family going to be a permanent safe place for that kid? I mean, going back to their home. And just as a side note, of the 150 some kids that are removed on the average in the last couple of years from their homes in Missoula County, the statistics are, have been, and they may change with the meth thing, but the statistics are that somewhere between half and 2/3 of them will not be reunited. Right? Pretty close. So, put those numbers in your head. That means we're going to need somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 to 100 homes for 80 to 100 kids every year. And there aren't enough people in this room to provide that. So, but the other thing that's good to know, and you may know this if you've been through the court proceedings, is and from talks up here that I've listened to, the state has an obligation to push for reunification. And I think that's the right thing. I think that's a good thing because, as I said, taking kids away from a family, that's a big deal, and we shouldn't do that lightly. It should be a process where they get lots of opportunities to get their kids back. But CASA doesn't have that same responsibility. CASA's responsibility is to advocate for the best safe home and permanent home as quickly as possible. So the first two I talked about, safe and permanent, that's a judgment call. And you find you do that by sitting down, and I do it, by sitting down and talking to parents and looking them in the eye and trying to decide, is this mom got it within her to get her poop in a group so that she can be a good enough mom to this kid? That's a big responsibility, and I don't know that we're always right. But I'll tell you one story. One of my cases, I sat in the jail. May surprise some of you know me that I've never been to jail before that. I sat in the jail for 2 hours in a small room and talked to this woman. She was 29 years old. She'd had 6 kids by 5 different men, multiple felony convictions for drug use. Her mother had died on the streets of Missoula when she was 11 of alcoholism. Her father, everybody in her family that had ever meant anything to her was dead. She was a Native American woman. She was so native, just gorgeous native facial structure, like you'd see in one of those old black and white photos, standing there with next to a teepee, and it was just, classic look to a Native American woman. And she's just telling me her story, and at that time she had just had a baby, and she had 14-month-old twins. And I sat there and I listened to her, and I came away thinking, you know what? This woman never had a stinking break in her life. Never had a break. Her dad died. This horrible story. But she kept saying, I want to be a good mom. I want more than anything to be a good mom, and I want to be. And I came away thinking, if she had a break, there's a chance she could do it. And the other thing you learn in this business is compassion. And that doesn't come naturally to me, but I just can't avoid it. One of the first class we were in, my training class, Judge Deshaw, I think, they always bring a judge to come in and talk to the first training class. And Judge Deshaw came in, and he listened, I think, to us talk a little bit, and I kind of suspect there was a little undercurrent of judgmental attitudes amongst us new CASA volunteers. And when Judge Deshaw got up, he very quickly got to the point. He said, you need to understand that the people who are in this situation, who have had their kids taken from them, they're in this condition or in this situation for one or all 3 of these things: poverty, mental abuse, mental illness, or substance abuse. And often all 3. And often they were in the same condition as kids as they're putting their kids in. So you do really need to learn compassion. That doesn't mean it changes your judgment on what's best for the kid, because you have to be clear-eyed about that. But it really, most of my training with my mouth open, because I had no idea that stuff like this happened in Missoula, Montana. And it happens every single day. I mean, it really is, I think it's extremely healthy to know about this stuff that happens, and some of the kids that you've got here have been through it, I suspect. But it was eye-opening to me, and I think it enriches my life to know that it happens and to be able to do something about it. So, okay, safe home, permanent home as quickly as possible. We touched on this the last time, I think, when the CFS lady was here. This is really important because when a child is taken away from their family, a clock starts ticking, and the clock essentially is 22 months. And and correct me if I say anything incorrect here, Greg, but as I understand it, and I think I understand it pretty well, is that the child has, as soon as the child is taken away, the parents get a treatment plan that says, this is why your kid was taken away, and this is what you need to correct to get him back. And sometimes they're often very detailed, very complex, and difficult to comply with. If the parents are not in compliance with that treatment plan for, how do I say this? They have to be in compliance with that treatment plan for 15 out of the first 22 months, or the case automatically goes to termination of parental rights. So, you take someone who's high on meth all the time, their life's a wreck, and you yank their kids away from them, you slap this treatment plan on them, which, by the way, often doesn't get to them until 6 months afterwards, because for various reasons, just the pace of the court system. So they got 7 months to deal with, and they're already lost 6. They got no chance of getting this done. So that's the clock that's ticking. That's as quickly as possible. That's the clock we have to deal with. Now, sometimes, if a parent, there's a the process is slow getting started, and the parent really show up and they really say, I'm going to do this. They get clean. They do everything they're supposed to do. The judges have the ability to extend that time frame because they really do want these kids to go home. We all do, but we want them to go home to a good home. So those are the kind of the parameters that a CASA works in. Safe home, permanent home as quickly as possible within that time frame. And let me read you this court order. It's not very late. The court order is only 2.5 pages long, and I won't read the whole thing, but court appoints the CASA as the court appointed special advocate. He will represent the best interest of the above named child. Under the direction of the court, CASA will file reports. I'll get to the good part here. The CASA volunteer, the CASA program staff, who often fill in for us, are granted authority to view and or withdraw the court file in this cause. And this is the good part. Upon presentation of this order to any agency, hospital, school, organization, persons, or office, including the clerk of this court, Division of Social Services, Human Services agencies, pediatricians, psychologists, psychiatrists, police and sheriff departments, mental health clinics, chemical dependency evaluations, etc., the aforementioned shall permit CASA personnel to inspect and or copy any records relating to the child and parents and allow the CASA personnel to speak to all principals in the case. They shall have access to the child in the case. You cannot prevent me from seeing the child without an express court order, which they would never get. We have to keep things confidential, which we'll touch on in a minute. We're supposed to closely monitor the situation as long as the child is under court jurisdiction and confer with and apprise the parties, that's all the attorneys and the parents and the caseworker and so forth, apprise the parties to the case of the child's status and any changes or assistance that may be needed, requested, or recommended. Submit periodic reports as to what's in the best interest of the child. We can interview the parents, and that's most of it. Oh, you're also agents of the court and are granted judicial immunity, which means no one can sue you for what you're doing as part of your job as a CASA. That's a remarkably powerful order. I've never seen anything like it before, really. So that's one of the reasons I really like the program, because you've got, and sometimes I tell people I never make any real decisions. I just tell the judge what he should do. But the reality is there's the last word in the acronym is advocate, and there is a ton of advocacy you can do. And I find that in my day-to-day work as a CASA, most of the work that you do is just making stuff happen. Hey, have you done this? Is this hearing coming up? Or hey, have you talked to this parent? Or sometimes it's simple as one case I had, they couldn't find the dad. Nobody could find the dad. And you'd run into this lot. They got no cell phone. Maybe they're homeless. Maybe they're in jail, in and out of jail, and nobody could find them. Well, I went and found him. It wasn't that hard. So I got the dad to come show up and do what he's supposed to do. So sometimes it's advocating for actually the parents, because if you got parents who act like they really want to get things right and get their kid back, that's the best outcome that we can have is to have a parent, or parents, hopefully 2 of them, have their life in order, get their life in order so they can get their kids back. That's the happy ending we all hope for. Unfortunately, 2/3 of the time it doesn't usually happen. So, where I was going with that, but, advocating, yeah. So there's a lot of times where you've got more, you do actually help get things done and advocate for the kid. I helped find foster families for 2 of my kids. Just started looking, calling around, and found foster families for 2 of these kids. So, I mean, and those kids are, one of them's been there 7 months now and is going to be adopted, and the other one's going to be there soon and into his foster family, and they want adopted desperately. So, it's you have a lot more of a role as an advocate than they tell you in training. So, any questions on what I've said, or?
I do.
Yeah.
Can I give you kind of like a case thing, and then I kind of like what you...
Do a stump the chump, or? Yeah.
Okay. Let's say you have, let's say 5 children.
Me?
All together in one case.
Okay.
Okay. And the parent decided that they just want one child back. So they try to, and this is 9 months down the road. Okay.
Yeah.
And then they are trying to do one thing out of this big list.
Treatment plan?
Yeah, trying to. What would you go and say to the courts on the other children?
Well, you can't make
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, a parent can voluntarily relinquish their parental rights.
But the thing is, they won't. So
Okay.
what do you do as a CASA to help the family that has taken in the children that want to stay and be adopted by the adults in that family? But because the parent is working on that one little thing,
But are they doing the whole treatment plan? No, well, then they don't.
just for that one child.
But they got to be in compliance with the whole treatment plan in order to get any kid back.
So you say 22 months. So if they're working on one thing on that plan, does that stop?
Nope. They got to be in compliance with the whole treatment plan. Here's what a typical treatment plan would look like. You've got to get UAs, your analysis every week, or as often as the caseworker says you have to, depending on the case. They might say 2-3 times a week and more if I want them. You got to get UAs all the time if it's a substance abuse thing, and it often is. You've got to go and get a chemical dependency evaluation, so they got to make an appointment. You got to get a mental health evaluation. They got to make an appointment, actually go to it. They've got to. What are some other things?
Psych evals.
Psych evals.
Yes.
The psych evals. You've got to enter counseling with someone. You got to go. You got to do circle of security.
Parenting classes.
You got to go to the circle of security class and parenting classes. I mean, sometimes these people often don't have vehicles, and they don't have any money.
Do you have the right to see?
Do I?
Does the foster parents have the right to
Don't
see that plan?
No. No.
So that's sort of where this
Yeah.
whole conversation is going. Like, as you guys know, you don't get any explicit legal representation.
And we need it.
But what we can do is be a liaison between what's going on in the courts and what's going on with you as foster care parents. I'm sure you're all frustrated with CFS and social workers. I mean, they barely respond to me. They barely respond to attorneys. So I'm sure they're not keeping you guys in the loop as to what's going on with your kids' proceedings. But Brian sort of laid the foundation of everything that a CASA does and what we're capable of doing. So that should give you an idea of how valuable of a resource that a CASA can be for you as a foster parent. Obviously, we have the consideration of confidentiality with a lot of this, but there is some information that we are able to relay to you. You might not know when your child's court hearings are, if there's a family engagement meeting or a treatment team meeting. Those are things that we can make you aware of, and in a general sense give you an idea of the activity in your case.
And Charity wanted me to be sure and mention that the judges really like it when the foster parents show up to court hearings.
Oh yeah.
A lot of foster parents don't even know that.
Okay, so that's my next point, is if you have a CASA on your case, establish a relationship with them. Hopefully they're doing a good job, hopefully they're engaged, but they can be a resource to you, and they would be happy, they should be happy to tell you whatever they are able to tell you. Court hearings are public information. I think that you should know about. You've got every right to go to those. And the judges sometimes might call on you and say, "How's Johnny doing?" And that's your opportunity to speak up. What's that?
Unless it's an equity case, then it's a whole different ballgame.
And it is a whole
Well,
different
yeah,
ballgame.
yeah, it can be, yeah, especially if it goes to jurisdiction elsewhere. Yeah. But and my point is establish a relationship with your CASA, because CASAs love foster parents. CASAs are awesome, but foster parents are more awesome because you guys work way harder. You're doing way more than we do. You got more hours. You got more blood, sweat, and tears. I think the world of you guys. It's just unbelievable. We couldn't do our job without you. Impossible. So we really, and I've had, here's a little distinction that might be helpful. If your child is still in temporary legal custody, then there's less that I can tell you about what's going on, because I'm still dealing with mom and dad, and I've got some confidential stuff that I'm learning about, and I just can't tell you that stuff. But I've got my other case, the kids are in permanent legal custody. They are wards of the state, and they are in the process of being adopted, I expect and hope. And in that case, in that case I was involved in kind of the vetting of these family. I wanted to know who they were. My little boy's going to go with. I want to make sure it's a good family. And one of the first things I said to him was, this kid's been through hell. And he spent 2 years in a group home, and before that his life was unimaginable. The last thing he needs is to be disrupted from another home, to lose hope again. So my biggest concern is I want you to have all the information you need to make a good decision about whether you want to do this. And the caseworker in this case gave me complete permission, and in fact helped to allow that family to see everything in the file. We want them to know everything about these kids so that A, they can make a decision in the first place whether they want to do this, and then B, they're hopefully better prepared as they take this kid and they're encounter the reactions and the results of the trauma that he's been through. They're not surprised. And so in that case, basically we tell these foster parents everything. I mean, we had them, they're allowed to see the file, they know everything, and that's totally fine. But it's a little different when they're PLC and not PLC. Does that make sense?
I think we had a question over here.
So what if there's a parent that's jumping through the hoops, they're doing everything CPS asks, and it's looking really good, but the psychological evaluation does not look good, and the parental evaluation does not look good?
You mean like a parenting ability?
Like the parental evaluation and the self-evaluation, if they're showing other stuff than what a parent's displaying by doing everything on the parenting plan, does the CASA take that into consideration, even though the parent's jumping through all the little hoops?
Oh yeah, I mean, you look at the whole picture, and then believe me, your BS meter gets fine-tuned pretty good in this. It's well calibrated, and you're lied to all the time. So yeah, you look at that, and I personally kind of think I have a high standard as to what's good for this kid. I'm not, honestly, I've had a few cases, but it's usually pretty black and white in my experience. It's not well, is this parent really, is it really a tough call? No, for me it hadn't been. It hadn't been at all, I can tell you. So far it's been easy to make the decision. In fact, one case, parents made it for us. They just relinquished.
Does the judge always listen to you, or do sometimes they go against
You
you?
have to ask them. They say they do. In fact, they say,
Ruling against what you thought?
Not yet, but it happens.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, our CASAs don't always necessarily agree with CFS. They don't always necessarily agree with the judge. Not always, but it certainly happens.
We're human. They're human.
And at what point are you out of the child's life? And if the child is confiscated again by CPS after it's reunited, it's the same possible.
I don't know.
The same family.
I'm still alive, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. So as soon as CFS dismisses, then that the CASA's order is effectively resolved. And yes, if a case does reopen, it's our hope that the CASA would take it on, and more times than not they do again. But again, sometimes they've moved away, or these CASAs come from all walks of life. We have students, retirees, current workers, so each of their circumstances is different, and their involvement is.
If you don't have a CASA for your case, I got a couple suggestions for you. Call him, for starters, and say, hey, this kid could really. Second one is, if you know somebody who wants to be a CASA, tell them to get trained and volunteer for your case.
Yeah.
That'd be easily doable.
Particularly if you're in Mineral County.
Yeah.
We're also, our grants serve Mineral County as well, so we're always looking for volunteers out there. Quick plug. But yeah. And
You kind of answered part of the question that I was going to ask about when the case is closed, CPS steps out. Then what if they get another call, which is trying to get the mother in trouble, even though the mother is not around the kids? Can you still call that the CASA that you had and talk to him to see what?
If the case has been dismissed, if the case has been dismissed, we have zero authority. Our court order is dissolved. So I would say no on the instance you just described.
Well, the thing is, I just was granted on the 2nd of this month full guardianship of 3 of my grandchildren. I got a phone call from Family Services today saying that someone called in and said that the kids' mom had took the baby into a meth house. I don't even allow her around them one-on-one. They're always supervised, and unfortunately, it is my daughter. But she's too much into drugs to be trusted with these children alone. And I've had the older 2 all their lives, and just received baby when he was 9 months old, he's almost 3 now. And so it's like they're trying to get her in trouble, but it's actually causing trouble for me. So that's why I was wondering if I could maybe call my CASA and.
If you still got one, absolutely. And that's another good reason to have a relationship with them, because they get to know you, and they trust you, and they believe you, and you're looking out for them. Because you got basically the same interest in mind, and the best interest of the child.
And I know she told me she went to the school and talked to the older 2 kids, and they also, even before she talked to me, also had confirmed that they've not ever been alone with their mom.
Yeah.
So.
Way back in the back.
We've got about two parents. One of them are trying to jump through the hoops and really focus on what she's supposed to be doing. And the other one has nothing to do with it. And the other parent, if she finishes doing what she has to do and gets the child back, but the other parent is very violent and everything, are they still on that clock where their parental rights can be still taken away?
Can you run into that?
I think I know what you're asking, and in situations like that, I've seen it where dad wasn't complying with the treatment plan. It was actually built into the treatment plan that if it was built into mom's treatment plan that she couldn't live with dad. So effectively, they both had to be complying, or mom would have to move out.
But she is complying, but he's really violent. I mean stalking like violent, like person.
That sounds like 911.
Are they living together, or?
Not anymore, but
Yeah,
like
it's
he does
911.
get the child back, he comes after with that, because what I'd like to see for the two of them is either he gets treatment and he fixes himself, or when she does get the child back, if she moves away so he can't find her. I don't know if that's even legal or not, but
Yeah.
at the same time, would there be, I mean, is he on a time clock separate?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Than she is?
Yeah.
So the state can still go ahead and say, you're on this time clock, we're gonna take your right for
Yep.
it. Awesome.
Yep. I believe so.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't want to be doling out like explicit legal advice, but yeah, I mean,
I think that's, yeah, your caseworker should be able to tell you that. Yeah.
yeah.
I just had some questions about, so we're in our second placement right now and didn't have a CASA for our first one, so this CASA thing's kind of new. I just met her last week. But I feel like we're allowed to go to court hearings, but I have 3 kids that are under 4 in my house, so I can't bring, and I'm working, so I can't bring all the kids to court, because that's crazy. So I don't get to go, but is my CASA the right person to talk to about what happens? Can she tell me everything that goes on in court? Because I could be there, I just physically can't.
Yeah, absolutely. So most of our CASAs attend all of the court hearings.
And I know she does.
Regardless, I attend all of the court hearings, and I take notes for the CASAs who are unable to attend. So yes, she would be the best person to get that information to you, or she could refer
Because I don't want to
you
bother
to
the
me.
social worker because she's so busy. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, if she's active on her case, then she'll be an excellent source of information for that.
That's a good point. People often ask a lot what's involved in being a CASA. You know, and it's some work, but it's not, and it does ebb and flow a little bit. But I would say, I mean, for me, I don't keep track of all my hours, but I would probably say I put 5 or 10 hours a month into a case, depending on the month. But the nice thing is I work and I can't go to hearings. My wife's a CASA. She teaches school. Well, she can't go to a number of the hearings. Well, they're always there. So you can call and say, hey, I can't make this hearing. I want to tell the judge this. Haven't got my report in yet, but I'll get it to him next week. And then he'll give them that information, and he'll get information and pass it back to you as a CASA. So it's not, the time commitment is not huge.
Yeah.
It's really not bad.
And the cool thing is, I a lot of times with new CASAs, there's this misconception that they're a volunteer, that they're not going to be taken seriously as a part of the treatment team, but that's not the case at all. Our volunteers have, I mean, they can't change when the court hearings happen. That's ultimately up to the judge. But for things like treatment team meetings and family engagement meetings, like, our volunteers are just as much a player as the social worker or the attorneys, and they're in correspondence to set those meetings, and they can call for a meeting if they feel like it's necessary. So again, that's another thing that it's important to communicate with your CASAs about. Something I wanted to mention. Brian alluded to the fact that the judges really like when you are able to attend the hearings. Another thing that they really like is I mentioned we submit quarterly reports to the judge. I have a lot of CASAs who have really strong relationships with their foster care parents, and they'll text pictures back and forth, and I know Brian does it. He'll include photos in that CASA report, and the judge that I supervise, Judge Desha, really gets a kick out of them. So that's just a cool thing, and a way to let the judge know how things are going for the kid.
I have a really big question.
Yeah.
Can foster parents become CASA? Can they do that too?
Yeah.
They just
Yeah.
won't be able to be on the case
Right.
until they have
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now, can they use the hours that you need to be licensed with CASA training?
Yes.
You
I bet you.
can?
I bet you it would, because as a foster parent, you need recurrent training. Same thing for CASAs.
Yeah, I was
It's
actually
often the same thing.
going to flip that question on you guys, because our volunteers, once they've been with us for a year, they have a requirement to accrue 12 continuing education credits. So I offer at least monthly, what we call in-service trainings. And I try to get a good variety of trainings.
It's really good.
I don't know if you're familiar with the Adverse Childhood Experience Study. I've had somebody in to talk about ACEs. We'll have people from Evolutions come and talk about, what UAs look like for the parents. We'll have CFS come and speak. So I offer these monthly trainings every month, and we were actually talking about doing those here. I'm always looking for new venues to put on those trainings, and I'd have to run it by our board, but I'd imagine we could invite you guys, and I don't know what that looks like for you in terms of your requirement, but if it helps you guys accrue the required hours that you need, then I'd be happy to invite you, so long as it's okay with our board. But it seems like a no-brainer to me.
Right on time. Any other questions?
Yeah, I do actually.
Yeah.
During the status hearing, what kinds of things did a CASA bring up or speak to the judge about?
During a status hearing?
Yeah.
How's the kid doing? He's in his foster home. He's doing good in school, or he's not doing good. That's really what he wants to know. It's just like he'd like to be there. He'd like to be what we are, but he can't for all of them. So he just wants to hear what we're seeing and hearing.
So good and bad.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, judges will literally just more or less go down the line. They'll check in with CFS, mom's attorney, dad's attorney, social worker, and then what do we have from the CASA? And yeah, we can share the good and the bad.
And I come to these things, try to come to as many of these as I can. If you ever got any questions, hit me up while I'm here. If you have a question, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you've got about your CASA, anything.
So one last note, I'm kind of excited. We got we used to have these really outdated pamphlets, and this is the first night I get to give out these new fancy brochures, and it's just information about sort of CASA generally. It does have our contact information at the bottom, so I've put those over there. I've also put volunteer applications. If you know somebody or you yourself are interested, that's also available online at casamissoula.org. So I really encourage. We have an upcoming training that begins next week, and if you know somebody, we could probably turn it around pretty quickly and get them trained and assigned to a case. We do probably 4 to 5 trainings a year. We just completed a training that we spit about 15 new volunteers out. This one starting on Monday, we'll have about 25. So yeah, we're getting about 60 new volunteers every year. Yeah.
Are the trainings always Monday, Wednesdays?
No, that's a good question. Sort of variable. I imagine we'll have the date set for. We'll do like a spring, summertime training. I imagine we'll have those set here pretty shortly, within the next couple weeks. We do offer a flex training, which is 15 hours in person and 15 hours online. So that's a little more flexible, like if you're a student or you work full time or what have you. So yeah, again, my name's Greg. My email address is super easy. It's just greg@casamissoula.org. So if you have questions about volunteering, or if you have a CASA yourselves and you have things you want to discuss about them, I likely know them. So yeah, give me a shout.
Great,
And-
thank you.